Welcome to Family Law Uncovered, a podcast from Thursfields Solicitors, one of the leading law firms in the Midlands. My name is Jill Roberts. I'm a Senior Associate in the Family Department here at Thursfields who specialises in family law. In this series of podcasts, we're interviewing top experts from across the UK on a range of crucial subjects in this legal area. Today's episode is all about mental well-being surrounding separation, and I have today with me Becky Hanson from Becky Hanson Counselling and Support Services.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you very much for having me here today. I'm really excited to be talking to you about this subject. I feel very passionate about it, so very much looking forward to it. I think ensuring people's mental health during a separation and divorce really needs to become a priority. I think we can often get bogged down in the legal aspects of it, and people very quickly, if not careful, can become drawn into their battles. And what I want to support people to do is to make their divorce, their separation, a life event that they can move on from, and help to stop it becoming a traumatic life event that stays with them and has a lifelong impact on then the rest of their relationships in their life.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Becky. I think it's very fair to say that relationships form one of the biggest part of our lives, and when they do break down or are disrupted, has a massive impact on everybody's, all parties involved, mental well-being. And the way that that's dealt with can make a huge difference on how the parties move forward going from there. And I think it's really important for them to have the correct support system around them at that time, to get them through that difficult period. I know at Thursfields that's something that we're very aware of, and that sometimes clients do need that additional support from other professionals, such as yourself, Becky. And we try to take a holistic approach and work with other professionals so that they get all that rounded support through that really difficult period. I know as lawyers, as you commented earlier, is a very different role to perhaps what you would do. You know, we can offer the legal and practical advice, but emotionally, it's a very challenging time for clients. Could you explain perhaps a bit more about what your role would be and how you would support clients in that time?
Yeah, of course, because divorce, separation, like you say, it is one of the most turbulent times of our lives, and when everything is at full stretch, it's very difficult then to have to make what actually essentially are some of the biggest decisions you've got to make in your life. And when we're in crisis, our minds are chaotic, everything can feel extremely scrambled. I think counselling is an opportunity to come and create some calmness, have a place to offload, to be able to hear yourself, to be able to be heard. It can be extremely freeing, it can be very liberating, but it can also create the space that clients may need to then be able to come back to seeing a professional like yourself and to actually be able to answer your questions with more clarity, and actually to be able to really hear the advice that you're giving them, because they're not coming from such a high emotional state. Hopefully their emotions have been helped to be soothed by a counselling process.
Yeah, perhaps not so clouded as well. Yeah, I know from my own experience, particularly when I first see a new client, their emotion, they go through a whole range of emotions. Is that your experience as well, Becky?
Absolutely, and it's huge, the amount of emotions that people might have, and they range. Not every person is going to have exactly the same feelings. They can range from really deep sadness to rage, sometimes hate, sorrow. There are all sorts of emotions that people are likely to feel, and I think the hardest part of feeling any emotion is actually giving yourself the opportunity to do it. And it can be a very frightening and daunting thing to do.
Yeah.
Because we have an innate drive within us that says, keep going, be strong. And often people can see coming to counselling as perhaps not a strong thing to do, that perhaps it's a sign of weakness, that actually if I drill down on those emotions, am I going to crumble? Will I be unable to keep going through this process? So it takes an awful lot of courage to come and do it.
Yeah, of course, and sort of changing people's mindset that actually it's a form of self-care, and it's something that actually is necessary and that actually could come out stronger the other end because they're more able to make those decisions rather than, like you said, crumbling,
Yeah, and making those decisions that are based on themselves, because I think the theme of this podcast is really about relationships, isn't it? Like you said, and actually one of the most fundamental relationships in our lives is the relationship that we have with ourselves. A good life is built on good relationships, and the foundation of all of those relationships is the relationship we have with ourselves. And so at the point of separation or divorce, it's probably the first time in a long time, if ever, in their adult lives that people are starting to maybe be encouraged to be able to ring fence themselves. What do I want? What do I need? How do I think? What do I feel? How do I think as an I rather than a we? And that's what I really encourage people to do through counselling.
What kind of coping mechanisms would you sort of say that would be really helpful for people going through a separation, Becky?
There are lots of things that I would suggest. And I think what I would point out with all of these things is that in isolation, probably none of them are that effective, but it's the accumulative effect of really starting to think about yourself, to do some real self-care, and to think, how do I top myself up? Sometimes I think obviously coming to counselling is important to give yourself that space, that opportunity to free some of those emotions. And I'll say to clients, sometimes just think of this as a space that, it's not very nice saying, but just come and have a verbal vomit. Come and offload those feelings, and you can leave them here.
Yeah.
And feel freer from them. There are lots of these things are really quite obvious, but being really mindful about your alcohol intake, all of these things that will make us feel quite high temporarily, they will also really bring us quite low as well. And that can be really quite detrimental when you're going through something like a divorce or separation, which is really depleting anyway. It does zap all of the resources from you. I think it's thinking about, who are my trusted confidants, actually, who are my friends? Who are the people that boost me up? Who are the energy zappers? And it's going to the right people for the right advice and the right support. Because again, when you come to see a counsellor, it's not a social relationship. It's not a friendship. It's built around an ethical framework. It's a professional, boundaried relationship. And often people are saying what they think you want them to hear when it's in a social setting, and you can be quite bombarded by other people's experiences, which obviously can be helpful, but also it can be quite destructive as well. So it's really trying to prioritize yourself. I'm a real big believer in looking to nature and trying to get outside as much as you can do. I'm not a huge fan of the word exercise. It tends to make me not want to exercise, but just to move, because if we can move a muscle, move our bodies, we can tend to move our mindset. So even if you think, right, I'm going to go for a walk for 30 minutes, before you leave the house or wherever you are, on a scale of 1 to 10, how am I feeling, with 1 being awful and 10 being brilliant? Go for a good walk, try and get your blood pumping. When you get home, repeat that. How am I feeling now? And invariably, you will have moved up that scale a little bit.
Yeah.
And that can then indicate that actually you can do things that can support yourself. So it's not going to be revolutionary, but it will keep you topped up.
Yeah, and can sort of keep you on a level.
Keep you on an even keel. And when you're looking, I always think when you're out for a walk, look at nature, look at what's around you. Because in itself, it gives you that space for quiet contemplation without even realizing that you're doing it. It provides that peace, that calm. And try and look for the oldest tree, for example, that you can see on your walk, and just imagine how many years, maybe hundreds of years, that it's been here. Really look at it. I'm not going to suggest you hug it, but really look at it and see how twisted it is. Look at the branches that have died, but the ones that keep going, the knots, the twists, the turns, and the droughts that it's survived, all of the storms. And it's just, I think, quite a solid message that life does keep going. And whilst you may not feel the sun will shine again, it will, and this does pass. So we can take a lot from nature, I think.
Yeah, that's quite often what I say to quite a lot of clients, is that it's you're going through a storm at the moment, and you will come out of the other end. It's getting through that period whilst you do, yeah. I know there's something I experience quite a lot with new clients that are coming in to see me, is that sometimes they can be in very different emotional stages in the process. So, for example, I might have a husband or a wife that will come to me, and the other party's already issued divorce proceedings, but they come to me and they weren't ready. They weren't anywhere near ready for that. So emotionally, they're at very different stages, and they're one party is almost being forced to get on board with a situation that they're not ready for and not comfortable with. Have you got any suggestions of how you would support clients through that situation?
Well, I think actually what you say is very normal, isn't it? Actually, it's more the norm than not. I think it's quite unusual for couples to come and be in the same place at the same time. And going back to what we were talking about with the emotions we might feel, a lot of the emotions we feel will mirror that of grief and bereavement, because it's a loss. There's a lot of loss involved in our way of life. How we live our life, who we live our life with, how we're going to be. I think even if you're the one initiating the separation process, you're still going to be feeling fraught with complex emotions and feelings. So I don't know if you've heard of Kubler-Ross and the grief cycle.
I've heard it. I didn't know that was what's called, but I've heard of the grief cycle before, yeah.
And I think that can be really quite helpful, in that there is these stages of grief, which is denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance. And we will go through all of those as we do with a bereavement or a loss. It's very likely that you'll do that through separation and divorce as well. They don't follow each other. It's not a clear process or a linear process, but you will go through them. And I think if you can understand where you are using something like Kubler-Ross's cycle, it actually might help you to understand where your ex is as well.
Yeah.
And whilst it doesn't, what that provides actually is some compassion to both yourself and to them.
Yeah, sort of seeing it from their perspective as well, and appreciate where they're coming from, to have a better understanding of why they're reacting perhaps the way that they are.
Yes, yeah. I think it can be really helpful.
Yeah, come to that understanding. And understandably, all the way through, emotions are running very high. Going through a relationship breakdown, they're not always in the best mindset for making decisions. I think we've touched on that slightly earlier. And sometimes decisions can be made from those negative emotions and not perhaps always the best decisions. What would you suggest for clients sort of perhaps getting into a better mindset to be able to do that? Would you suggest it's more like what you've said about recognising your own, where you are in that cycle, or recognising where you are with your own emotions to be able to process that?
Definitely, but I think it's giving yourself the opportunity to start processing it. Sometimes we're not able to start processing because we're in the middle of dealing. But actually, if we give ourselves some time and some space to actually just sit and feel some of those emotions, that will actually make us feel stronger to carry on doing that. Because even if we're not going through a really challenging life event like a separation and divorce, how often do any of us sit down and think, right, how am I feeling today? If we do that, the likelihood is that you're not going to do it for very long. There's going to be something else that actually you feel you just need to get on with, because actually really truly thinking about how we feel is not that comfortable.
Yeah.
And if you're doing it whilst you're going through a divorce or a separation, it's going to feel even more complex. And so, yes, I think having a space that's confidential, that is just for you, where you have permission to give the unvarnished truth about how you feel and to say exactly where you think you're at that time, I think can be very, very beneficial, really freeing for people.
I think that comes back to sort of what we were talking about earlier about having different roles, is that if they have that support from somebody such as yourself as they're going through that process to be able to do that, then that then makes the decisions that sometimes they have to make with us as lawyers more clear or more easy to be able to do, or not coming from perhaps the negative emotions that we were saying before that they can do.
Definitely, because when you're in crisis and you're hurting, it's hard. It's really hard to listen. It's hard to take on that advice, and it can be useful to have that alternative perspective, and also maybe with a bit of gentle, empathetic challenge as well, in a place where you feel safe, because we feel really vulnerable.
Yeah,
really vulnerable.
One thing that's very important is how the actual separation process is dealt with, because that can have a massive impact for clients and children going forward in their lives. The damage a separation can do to parties and children's mental well-being can be extremely destructive if it's not dealt with constructively. But there are ways that can be minimised. I think from my perspective, a lot of people, when they sort of hear divorce lawyer, they think, straight away, automatically, that means arguing, that means court proceedings, but that doesn't always have to be the case. I know certainly at Thursfields, we always try to deal with things as amicably as we can and use less confrontational methods such as mediation and roundtable meetings, so that issues can be dealt with to try and minimise the impact on clients going forward, because ultimately, we are not going to be in their lives forever, and they're going to have to move positively forward after this experience. There are some circumstances from our perspective when the action has to be taken, and that's unavoidable. But in a lot of cases, there are other options that are available and can minimise that. What do you think your experience is, Becky, of sort of clients that perhaps are in court proceedings versus using less confrontational methods, and what effect that has on clients' mental well-being?
Yeah, I think even the word court to somebody who's not a legal professional is very frightening, actually.
And daunting.
Really daunting, really daunting. And we know that high conflict is corrosive to our mental health, our well-being. Actually, it has an impact on our physical health as well. And a divorce doesn't have to be high conflict if possible. So it's hugely beneficial to avoid that, because it will have lifelong consequences, particularly, like you said, for children, and it can impact on their sense of self, their identity, their sense of belonging, their safety, their security. Same for adults, actually. The conflict can really mask actually some of the real issues that are going on and where we want to move forwards to. It can take away our feelings of control. You can feel very, very overwhelmed by it. I've worked in social care with children and families for a number of years, and I'm also a family consultant for the Parenting Apart programme, where we support families who've experienced breakdown of the parental relationship and are moving from cohabiting all together under one roof to becoming co-parents. And how do you do that if you're in high conflict? And it's all very well going to court and having a childcare arrangement order, but actually in reality, how do we really navigate that in the real world? And I think a safe, confidential space like counselling, whether it's individually or together, can really help to try and take the heat out of that conflict, to really try and make things calmer and a smoother transition, because it is one of the most challenging times for everybody. But certainly in the counselling room, I do see many adults that come, and actually what they're coming with is unresolved trauma from their parents' divorce many, many years ago. And that's what we want to try and move away from. And so hopefully with no fault divorce, we can start really thinking about doing it differently, and that having support for your mental well-being and your emotional well-being will be just as straightforward and a sort of no-brainer as it would be to go and make sure your legal side of things are in check as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly one of the reasons that the no-fault divorce was brought in, was to minimise that conflict and try and do that going forward. Because, as you quite rightly say, if they're arguing about what they're going to get divorced about in the first place, it doesn't put them on a good setting to then try and resolve the other issues, such as the financial matters and the children matters. So to try and minimise that conflict as much as possible, that's why they brought in the no-fault divorce. So I think that's been a slightly positive step in terms of divorce law recently, in terms of what we're talking about today. But I think there are other things that can still be improved. And like I said, trying to find the right lawyer that can offer that holistic approach and work with other experts such as yourself to give them that support, but also to use those other non-confrontational methods, such as I discussed before, the roundtable, the mediation, that can really help going forward, I think. Yeah. One of the things that we try and do is we will try and match clients with the right lawyers, because all lawyers have different backgrounds, they have different experiences. I know at Thursfields we've got a large team of experienced lawyers that have a diverse range of experience and backgrounds, and sometimes it can be really about getting the right fit with a lawyer. I think clients sometimes can just not gel with a lawyer sometimes, and it just doesn't work, and it's about making them feel comfortable, and that's something that we really do try to do at Thursfields, is it will be match them with the right person. Is that something that you would agree with as well?
Oh, absolutely. I think yes, wherever you're getting support, whatever you're looking to others to support you with, it is crucial that we get the right person. And again, it threads back to relationships. And in a counselling process, your counselling's, regardless of your counsellor's background, what modality they use, it's the relationship between you and your counsellor that is going to make it a successful process or not. Can I feel trusting with this person? Can I really be vulnerable with this person? Do I feel safe here?
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. It's finding the right person, and the right person that you can build that trust with. And it's about that relationship.
Yeah. Definitely trust is a big thing. Some of the things that need to be discussed and need to be talked around, trust is a big thing from any expert, I think, that you're using during that process.
It is, because you've got to trust them in order to start building your own confidence, in order to start really trusting yourself, and being able to ring fence yourself as a priority. You've got to have that core belief in yourself. So you really need to trust those around you. So I always say to clients whenever they make their first contact with me, is do ring other people as well, because this is about you. This isn't about me. This is about making sure you have the right person for you right now. So do your research, call people up, speak to people, and just trust how you feel with them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the topics that we've been discussing today around mental well-being, it's often a very difficult topic for anybody to bring up. Even if you're not going through a separation process, it's a difficult subject that some people find difficult to talk about. I think getting the right, like I said before, getting the right support from an expert like yourself, it's not a weakness. It's actually showing a strength that you're recognizing that you do need that extra support. And self-care is really important, as we've discussed before. What would you say that you would be your top tip for somebody that was finding it difficult to talk about the issues that we've been talking about today?
Well, it is difficult, and it's difficult because it's painful. Those emotions are really very painful. They can feel physically painful, but pain is the agent of change, and we will never grow or create the change that we want if we stay within our comfort zone, within these walls that we build up around ourselves. If we can have the courage to start taking those walls down, to start exploring those feelings, to feel that pain, you will create that change. And it's never as frightening as you think it's going to be. Sometimes people think, if I do that, I will unravel. I won't be able to cope with this process. I've got to stay strong for this. I couldn't possibly do that.
Yeah.
And that very rarely ever happens. It's those middle of the night worries that then in the middle of the following day, they're never quite as bad. So that's what I would encourage people, feel that fear, but do it anyway. It's very rarely ever going to be as bad as you think it's going to be. It's an opportunity to really start thinking about you and making this process about you and not about your ex, actually.
Yes, focus on yourself and your own self-care.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's been a really great discussion today, Becky. Thanks for so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you.
You've been listening to Jill Roberts from Thursfields Solicitors and Becky Hanson from Becky Hanson Counselling and Support Services. Hopefully you've found our discussions on this topic helpful and useful today. If you're dealing with a family relationship breakdown and would like more advice, you can contact us directly via our website. Family Law Uncovered, an original podcast from Thursfields Solicitors. Thanks for listening.